I went to Cinderflat Depot for a fuel pump housing and a crate of coil relays, nothing more. That was the whole plan. I'd driven 4 hours in a truck with a bad alternator to buy parts for a business that was 2 slow months from folding, and I meant to be back on the road by dark. The depot ran 2 auctions side by side under the same corrugated roof, the way it always did out on the rim, salvage on one side, indenture contracts on the other, and nobody troubled themselves to keep a wall between the two. Scrap was scrap. That was the whole philosophy of the place. She was standing in the indenture line when I saw her, chained wrist to wrist with 6 others, and somebody had chalked a lot number on a board hung around her neck like she was an engine block. I want to say I noticed her because she was striking. That would be a lie I could tell easily enough and nobody would call me on it. The truth is I noticed her because she wasn't looking at anything. Not the crowd, not the auctioneer, not her own hands. She'd found a spot on the far wall and she was holding on to it the way a man holds a rail on a rocking deck. Her skin was a deep amber brown gone ashen at the knuckles from cold. Her hair had been shorn close and uneven, like it had been cut with whatever blade was handy and not much care taken. Pale sea-green eyes, dry, steady, giving nothing away. The chalk on her board read, "Damaged goods, labor only," and under that, in smaller letters, a species name I didn't recognize and a debt figure I did. The auctioneer called her a poor investment before he called her anything else, said the previous owner had worked the resale value clean out of her, and any buyer today was paying for whatever labor she had left in that body. Nothing sentimental about it. A few men laughed. She didn't flinch, which told me more than the laughing did. I'd been coming to Cinderflat twice a year for going on 11 years, ever since I took over my uncle's salvage yard, and learned the hard way that the rim doesn't run on new parts, it runs on old ones nobody else wanted anymore. I knew the smell of the place. Hot metal and diesel and the particular dust that settles over a lot where nothing gets thrown away, only resold. I knew most of the regular buyers by their coats. I'd never once, in 11 years, bid on the indenture side. It wasn't principle exactly. It had just never occurred to me that I could. I hadn't come there to buy a person. I want to be honest about that, because HFY stories like to pretend a man walks in already knowing his own heart, and I didn't. I stood there with 400 credits meant for parts and I watched the bidding for her contract crawl along at insult prices. Nobody wanting the trouble of a debt that size on a body that worn down. And something in me, I still couldn't tell you what, some old stubborn thing my father might have recognized, put my hand up. The broker's name was Hale Vantry, and he had the kind of smile men grow when they've never once had to apologize for anything. He ran the bid up on me for sport once he saw I meant it, all the way past what I had. Past what I'd need for the alternator, past what I'd need for next month's rent on the yard. I paid it anyway, signed the whole business over as collateral on the balance. Vantry laughed and called it the worst trade he'd seen all season, buying spare parts for a machine that had never run again. I didn't put her to work. That was the first thing she couldn't make sense of. I filed the manumission the same hour, right there at the depot's own registry window, voided the debt in her name instead of mine, and told her she was free to go wherever she wanted, whenever she wanted. She looked at the paper like it was written in a language she distrusted on principle. "Where?" she said. Not a question so much as a test. "Wherever," I said. That's what free means. She didn't run. I think she expected the catch to show itself if she waited long enough. So she waited. She sat in the bed of my truck the whole drive back to the yard with her chains gone and her wrists raw beneath where they'd been, and she watched me the way you'd watch weather that hadn't decided what it was going to do yet. At the yard I gave her the cot in the back room, my own coat for the cold nights, food that wasn't rationed to keep labor upright. I cleaned the chain galls on her wrists myself, careful, because the depot medic would have charged her for the privilege, and I wasn't going to let that be the first kindness she doubted. She let me, didn't thank me. I didn't need her to. Her name was Neris, of the Thalin line, though it took me the better part of a week to learn even that much, and longer still to understand it meant something to her people, that it plainly didn't mean to whoever had chalked a lot number over it. She didn't offer her history and I didn't ask for it. I've found that a person tells you what happened to them on their own schedule or not at all, and pushing only teaches them to lie faster. What I noticed, those first days, was how she flinched at doors closing behind her and never once in front of her. How she ate slowly, like she still expected the food to be taken back mid-bite. How she cataloged every tool in my yard within the first afternoon, not out of curiosity, I think, but because a person who's been property learns to know the shape of every room she's in case she needs to leave it fast. I didn't remark on any of it. I just left the doors open when I could and put the food where she could reach it herself. It took her the better part of 2 weeks to ask me anything besides where the water was. When she finally spoke, it wasn't gratitude. It was suspicion, plain and reasonable. Every man who's ever fed me wanted something for it eventually, she said. I'm still waiting to find out what you want. I don't, I told her. I bought your debt, not you. There's a difference, even if the depot never taught it to you. She studied me a long time after that, like she was recalculating some old sum. She started fixing small things around the yard without being asked. Not labor. She was careful to make that distinction herself. Just company for her hands while she decided what to do with the rest of her life. I let her decide on her own time. Nobody had ever given her that room before, and I understood, without her saying it, that the room mattered more than anything else I could have offered. Vantry came for her twice more. Once with a paper claiming a second debt she'd never seen, some administrative fiction about processing fees the depot's registry had no record of, and I told him so, calmly, with the actual manumission document in my hand and his own registrar's stamp on it plain as day. He left grumbling that first time, but I knew men like Vantry well enough to know grumbling wasn't the same as finished. He came back a month later with 3 men and no paper at all. Just the old habit of taking what a chalkboard once said belonged to him, figuring a salvage yard owner 4 hours from the nearest constable wouldn't have much recourse. I stood at the gate both times. I'm not a young man and I'm not built like the soldiers who pass through this rim. I've got a bad knee and a back that complains in the cold. But I'd bought that debt clean and legal, filed at his own registry window, and I wasn't handing back what I'd already set free. I told him as much, quiet, the way you'd tell a man the truth he already knows and is choosing to ignore. The second time, Vantry told his men to move past me, and she stepped up beside me before I'd even turned to look for her. Not behind me, beside me, and said the one thing that finally sent them off the property without their nerve. He asked me what I wanted, she said, to Vantry, to his men, to the whole rim if it was listening. You never did, not once, in all the years you owned my debt. That's the whole difference between you, and it's why I'm not leaving with you. Vantry didn't have an answer for that. Men rarely do, when the answer's been sitting in front of them the entire time, and they simply never thought to ask the question. She's still at the yard. Not because the debt says so, there is no debt, not anymore, I saw to that myself, but because she chose it, the way she never got to choose anything before, and she tells me now, some evenings, that the choosing is the part she still can't quite believe is real. I tell her she can test it as long as she needs. I'm not going anywhere either. I never did get that fuel pump housing. Turned out I didn't need it half as much as I thought I did.